Computer-Based Research Center, which used to be in the Gero building. And I took this postdoc after practicing clinically for 10 years because I wanted to get into USC and actually take advantage of the computer science department, which was doing VR back in those very early days. And so I did my day job in the Alzheimer's Center, but then knocked on doors over in computer science and showed some ideas. And eventually one guy said, hey, yeah, we got some equipment. I'll give you a student programmer. And that was the start of what's now called medical virtual reality, but back then it was called the VR Psych Lab. So we have our roots in gerontology, and we have some plans to do some things in Gero. But what I'm going to show you today is a collection of different applications. A couple that you can see the direct connection with aging populations, but you'll be able to see the general nature of clinical VR and how it can be applied across the lifespan in many different ways, from children with attention deficit disorder, which you'll see an application sitting over there, a virtual classroom, to some of the PTSD work, to physical therapy applications. I'm going to fire up some of these low-cost systems while you're getting a demo over there that show that VR doesn't always require, a computer. You can start doing things on a tablet, on a mobile phone-enabled headset, the new generation of standalone headsets, all the processing being done in the VR headset itself. So with all that, that's a general overview of what we'll see. History of the lab, we're at USC, Institute for Creative Technologies. We're part of USC, but we're also an Army UARC, University Affiliated Research Center. Started in 1999. The Army has these centers around the country that focus on different things. Our focus was to do virtual reality. Back in 1999, during the nuclear winter of virtual reality, because I don't know how you guys are pretty young, but probably before you were born, there was a similar hype cycle for VR in the early to mid 90s where VR was going to change the world. There was a lot of excitement and everything, but the technology wasn't there to deliver on it. Computing power wasn't that good. It was good, but not good enough. Computer graphics sucked. Just virtual reality headsets were horrible. Still, they're much better now. AI was limited. User interfaces were limited. But over the years, the technology has caught up with the vision, where at the same time, a lot of clinical research using VR in these more primitive forms has shown clinical value. So ICT was at the forefront of these early days, and the Army wanted this center here because they wanted to leverage Hollywood talent to be part of the mix. Expertise in gaming, computer graphics, special effects, and narrative in simulation, storytelling in simulation. So words like the unholy alliance between Hollywood, the military, and academia all in one building. So that's our center. As I mentioned, a lab, MedVR Lab, interdisciplinary group of folks that over the years have addressed sight, cognitive, motor, and virtual human apps. So for example, we don't have such loud sound here. Hold on. You know what? Let me check my sound so it'll come through there a little bit louder. Oh, my glasses. Okay, so we go with this. Okay, this should be a little bit better. No, so much for that idea. Give me 1 second. Always technology fails for me. This isn't so good. Well, you give this another 30 seconds, and if it doesn't unfreeze, then I'll just go on with the demo. Come back to this. All right, somehow it went back to the start. Here we go. Let's see how this works now. Okay, so
See if the
This is what you'll see in a few minutes, a simulation of Iraq and Afghanistan that's used for exposure therapy for treating people with PTSD, combat-related PTSD. We've also branched out in addressing military sexual trauma. We got good results with that, and we'll be moving in that direction in the civilian sector, as well as working with police, firefighters, first responders, people that are chronically exposed to emotionally stressful events as part of their job. That's what it looked like 10 years ago, so you can see what I'm talking about with, like, say, advancement in graphics. And in this case, what we did was, instead of using the simulation that we developed for treating PTSD, we actually started building cognitive assessment activities. So within an immersive simulation, we developed tests of attention, memory, and executive function as a way to create more ecologically relevant assessments of cognitive function, but also in an emotionally evocative environment where we know service members may have emotional responses that might compromise their cognitive performance. This was one of the first apps we did over when I was in Gero, a mental rotation application. This was 1997, 3D projection system, like a 3D TV, but a lot better actually. And you could interact with these kinds of three-dimensional stimuli. We showed dramatic improvements in the cognitive function of mental rotation and other visual spatial skills. We actually ran a study with elderly folks around 2000 with this, and found that when the stimuli was delivered as you're seeing there, but with the user wearing special glasses in 3D, that elderly people performed quite well. But when you ran the simulation without the 3D, it was just two-dimensional perspective interaction, the performance dropped off dramatically. So that, some basic science stuff about the elderly visual system and how 3D content may be actually a better approach or a better way to go when you build these things. When I say 3D, I'm talking about stereo viewing. This is a virtual classroom we developed. This is actually 2003. This is what a child sees in a headset looking around. They have to pay attention to what's going on the board and respond to stimuli. And meanwhile, distractions occur in the classroom. So a knock on the door, the teacher is going to go answer it. The kid in the back just threw a paper airplane. School buses going by the window, sound effects, kids passing notes, fidgeting. So an ecologically valid or relevant way of assessing attention in a realistic environment with the realistic challenges that a child may face in a classroom. And as well, all that head movement gives us a window into the hyperactivity component. So in a 10-minute trial, you see kids with ADHD with the hyperactive component moving their head and looking around a lot more. And as well, we can delineate when we're seeing an error due to distraction. If the child's looking out the window and they're missing stimuli that are appearing on the board, that's a distractibility error, as opposed to if they're looking straight at the board and the stimuli is in their field of view, but they're missing targets. That's a loss of focus. And that has implications for gender differences in ADHD. Mostly little boys are diagnosed because they manifest the hyperactive component and it's really visible. But we find that a lot of little girls have the loss of focus, the inattentive component, and they don't manifest the fidgeting and jumping around, and they fall beneath the radar because they're just being good students, sitting quietly, doing their thing. Anyway, so that's out when you'll see a quick demo of that later. In the motor rehab area, this is using a Microsoft Connect, which you'll see over there in various forms. I think we're going to show something a little different. But basically, the camera is capturing the user's movement on wires, markers, instrumentation, 3D depth sensing camera. That now doing a range of motion exercise, a whole variety of physical or occupational therapy type activities. Now you can make the very boring and repetitive activities of rehabilitation fun and engaging, put it in a game context. And we're measuring performance while this is going on. So you can give people feedback on small changes that, week 1 to week 2, maybe their range of motion goes from this to that. And they don't know the difference, so they're still frustrated because they have just had a stroke and they can't do what they did 3 months ago. But the system can show them that you're actually making improvement. Keep going. Let's keep this going. We know that repetition is at the core of rehab. you gotta do sufficient trials. When I worked in brain injury rehab as a clinician, I tell my clients, if you wanna recover your attention, memory, other cognitive functions, you gotta put in the effort, like if you were learning to play the violin. It's that kind of drill and practice that you need to do. So anyway, that's what that is. On a similar vein, Cerebral Palsy Foundation asked us to do a simple thing, make it so kids that have severe motor impairments can play video games. Wow. This little girl never played a video game in her life. She didn't have the manual dexterity in her fingers to play with a gamepad or a keyboard or even a joystick. But that was one movement she had good volitional control over. And so the camera actually captured that movement, used it as the interface to emulate the action on a keyboard or a gamepad, and make the shark jump out of the water and catch a helicopter. And a whole variety of these things can be done. Think of a driving game where somebody in a wheelchair with not much dexterity, but if they can shift at their core, they can steer the vehicle, lean forward to go fast, lean back to slow down. They're not going to play as well probably, but they can still participate. And get maybe a little core workout, which we can all use. Let's see. Finally, virtual humans. This one has specific relevance. We have a project, we're trying to get funded to do this with people with mild dementia in the home, to build a supportive virtual human agent that can be a prompter, a reminder, can engage them in game-like activities, and do reminiscence type therapy with them, with their own personalized content. Family members scan in photos, fill out history forms, and now the reminiscence therapy becomes more engaged in specific user history. But anyway, in one application, we build virtual patients. So think about you're becoming a clinician, you're becoming an MD. Why not practice before you see a real person with a virtual patient? So this is at the USC School of Social Work, training for how to deal with veterans in a suicide assessment.
Good afternoon, Sergeant Castilla. What brings you in today?
Well, my wife told me she thought I should talk to someone. She's been pretty concerned about me since a soldier suicided on base last week.
Did you happen to know the soldier?
Yes. He was a friend, but I met the Marine once or twice. He seemed normal at the time. I guess I'm afraid I might end up at camp.
Do you have any plans to hurt yourself?
No. It certainly crossed my mind, especially lately. I just need it all to stop. Sometimes I can't handle it.
Sorry.
You get the idea. It basically gives novice clinicians a chance to screw up a bunch with a virtual patient before they get their hands on a live one. And for my clinical training, clinical psych, I could have used that. You know, really, first year in clinical psych grad school, you know, you read a few books on therapy, take a couple classes, maybe a role play practice with a fellow student, and then you're seeing patients. You know, first year of clinical psychology or social work, you should carry a load of virtual patients online, check in each week, you know, practice your skills, have the content evolve, and that's what we're aiming towards. We've developed a toolkit here for building these kinds of things, you know, disseminating it for medical and clinical educators to build training cases. Finally, SimCoach. This is closer to the Juro idea. This was built for the military. A way for service members, veterans, or families who are hesitant to go see a shrink. They don't want to tell anybody that they're having problems. They don't even know if they're having a problem. But they can go online and privately interact with this guy and ask questions about PTSD. Could get information about what treatments are available. Meanwhile, he could ask questions in return that are thinly veiled screening questions. And at the end of that, based on the responses that the character gets, he might say something like, hey, looks like you're having a little bit of trouble here. You know, if you want, I can pull up a site on the right here, and you can punch in your zip code, and up will pop a list of providers in your area. So it's about a toe in the water, not replacing good clinical care, but promoting, helping people to do this, to seek care that they could ultimately benefit. I don't have time to show the full thing, but I'll just let him introduce himself.
Well, I'm not a real person, if that's what you're asking, but I'm based on the personality and experiences of real soldiers and Marines. I'm still just a piece of software, but I'm getting better all the time, so hopefully I can be a helpful piece of software to talk to.
Okay, so with that, let me jump ahead here. Actually, let me pause this. With that said, let's move to the first demo. And this is the exposure therapy treatment for combat-related PTSD. Andrew, do you have the, cool. So what I have here is a clinical interface. And this is what the clinician uses to operate and modify things in the environment based on the patient's individual needs. Now, if you're not familiar with PTSD, one of the best evidence-based treatments for it is to help a patient to go back and confront and process difficult emotional memories. Do it typically in imagination, but that's somewhat limited. So our idea was to put people in simulations, so when they're in the therapy, they can narrate their story as if it's happening right then and there, and the clinician can mimic it in the virtual environment. So it's basically helping a patient to confront and process difficult emotional memories in a safe setting, and in that regard, by a process called extinction learning, if you know much about behavioral psychology, by doing this repeatedly, the anxiety starts to reduce. And they start to see empowerment. People who go through these simulations they never thought they could go through before. They start talking about things that they never talked to anybody about before because it's very evocative. And that's what we do. So this is one of 14 different worlds. If I have time, I'll show you some of the clinical data, but basically what you're seeing up there is what's going on in this old school headset. We're updating everything to run in Oculus Vive and other modern headsets. But basically, let's add some sound. If the user's experience was as a driver in a Humvee, or maybe as a driver in a MRAP, different vehicle, let's go back to the Humvee, it's easier to demo. You could ask them, were you the driver, were you the passenger in the vehicle when the event happened, were you in the back seat, the other back seat, up in the turret, you know, what time of day was it?
Can you operate the turret?
Yes, you can. Also, were there clouds in the sky? Or were you using night vision? So now you can set the ambient settings around customized experiences. Let me get out of that night vision. Yeah, let's go to that. Let's get a little better light. You can start putting the user in different areas within this one simulation that may be more relevant to what they experienced.
Are you changing all of this just on that interface right there?
Right there.
That's really, looks really
Real-time clinician interface. Wizard of Oz interface.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So maybe we want to make it a dirt road. It was a dirt road, not paved. There you go. Where there was a roadside debris. Well, let's add some roadside debris, which you'll see popping up on the right. On fire. Oh, was there stuff like this going on?
Wow.
Or what about explosions off in the distance? Or we can bring that in a lot closer. And you notice you might hear something here. This is subwoofers under this platform that run the sound. So you feel the motor of the Humvee, but also the force of the explosion. And another way of enhancing presence in the virtual environment. As well, a smell machine that can pump out battlefield smells.
That's a smell machine?
Yeah. So you've got cordite, gunpowder, burning rubber, rotting garbage, diesel fuel.
Can we smell some?
Actually, we don't have the sets plugged in for the demo here, sorry. They're nasty smells.
Yeah.
You don't want to smell that stuff. But they're very evocative because we know that the olfactory system is linked in directly into the limbic system for driving memory and emotion. So we throw all this stuff into the mix here, but we can also, you know, again, start doing things like that. We can introduce these explosions anywhere. We can have an insurgent appear on that rooftop up there and fire an RPG. There, he's walking out. We start adding do this kind of stuff. That insurgents appear. You know. So you can rapidly create a fog that you would do that in a therapy session. I'm just demoing something right now. Let's get on a sandstorm. We can use fog, you know. We can make you the lead vehicle, or put that one up. We can hop you out of the vehicle and have you walk around in the simulation. All of the space you see in the distance is navigable space. You drive the vehicles out there and so on. Let's go back in the vehicle here. You know, tons of sound effects. Different weapons.
Does that exit have
Yeah.
Just ambient.
You know, a jet flying over, a helicopter. As you'll see shortly. So we can orchestrate the scenario around what the patient is telling us. All right. So you get the general idea of the way this kind of therapy would run. Who would like to try a foot